Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, the time has come. Patch 8.1 has been out for a while. I have jumped into the new content as I said I would, and yeah, now it's time for the review. So, BfA had a troubled launch, so while expectations might not have been massively high for this patch, I think it's definitely true that quite a lot rides on it, so that's what we're going to be doing today. Then as a quick note, we've got the new stuff over on Patreon for the Christmas period, and there's also going to be not war-related Patreon sort of stuff to bridge the break as well, so you can check that out, and a massive thank you to them for supporting. So let's hop into it, and we're going to start off with an easy one, Assault. So it's the expansions version of the Legion Invasions. You know what, they work in the same way, but overall in my view they're better to play because the better quest spawning and a stronger theme. Now the one thing that is still a problem is the timing system. It's kind of annoying. A 4 AM Assault is just not that useful to most players. And really, I think these would be better served being more dynamic, where player actions would actually trigger the assault for a longer duration, and maybe 2 or 3 could be active at one time. I think it does just highlight how arbitrary timers don't feel great in World of Warcraft. Now overall, I think they're a solid addition to the game. I don't think they're that transformative though, and I do think they feel like they should have been there from launch. Next, the Darkshore Warfronts. So visually, this is just gorgeous. It's a really beautiful bit of work, and I actually do think that the pacing of it feels better than Stromgarde. But past that, well, it doesn't it doesn't feel like your actions have much of an impact on what actually happens. I think you have more meaningful action and decision making in 20 minutes of questing than you do in a Warfront. I think that lack of possibility space and consequence is really a big problem for the system. Warfronts play out the same way every time, and because they are instanced, none of it feels like it matters. Wrath of the Lich King's Wintergrass proves that even a flawed system can be more effective if it feels like it actually matters to players. Warfronts don't, and Darkshore does not do anything to help that. Next, narrative content. We're going to stick with Darkshore for this. So, the Darkshore questline is quite short, and while some of the set pieces are kind of nice, and the latest incarnation of the zone is just gorgeous, the gameplay is not really memorable. For the most part, it does just feel like scenes are happening while your character happens to be there. This means you don't feel connected to the narrative through gameplay, and really you're just relying on your attachment to the characters to make that narrative carry through, and that's not really a given considering Battle for Azeroth's rather middling received plotline. Now, I appreciate them adding a new dimension to Elune. I'll definitely say that. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that I think there's a lot of potential for Elune to play a major role in the game, so I really did enjoy seeing Elune's lore being added to and all of those visuals, but overall I do think the narrative experience has been a little bit underwhelming for that one. For the most part, I think Blizzard need to rethink their narrative approach. Much of the BfA narrative content for me has just felt like we're watching scenes from a book or a television show play out while our characters are there, and it almost to me feels like the writing team makes stuff and then hands it off to the gameplay team, and that the gameplay people don't have a lot of influence or control. I really feel that the gameplay should be locked in first so the player has fun, and then the narrative should be supporting the gameplay, which at the end of the day is a classic Blizzard mantra that I think that recently in WoW they have just been getting a little bit away from. So overall, I think their quest designers could be better used elsewhere. Next, moving on to the war campaign, we do see major improvement over 8.0. Now look, being real with you, the 8.0 war campaigns, they're just a mystery to me. They were devoid of voice acting, and that really makes me think that they came together very late in the day after the voice actor availability was kind of gone. Now, having a lack of VO for the endgame story of a big game, that's just a real dud. And the storylines, the character moments for the 8.0 one, they just weren't that memorable. It did feel cobbled together quickly before launch. Now, in contrast to that, it's clear that the 8.1 war campaign is a lot more polished. But it's kind of inconsistent because whether or not there's voice acting is seemingly a coin toss. And, it's just that inconsistency, it highlights the weaker points. Additionally, it's clear that these were not written with any conception of the player's perspective, because in the Alliance campaign, characters mention the attack on the estate and Derek Proudmoore, but for an Alliance character who doesn't regularly visit Wowhead, they'll have zero idea that those things happen in the Horde War campaign. So I think this basic lack of narrative coherency is just unacceptable from a team of professional writers. I don't know if it's just a culture of a lack of self-criticism within Blizzard, but it's confusing that basics like this are an issue for them. Also, I think that voice acting consistency, that's a problem we solved with WoW Tales, and in a way that it didn't interrupt gameplay. So overall, I think the lack of polish and just general problems here are just unacceptable from a AAA product. What I will say though is I think it's quite cool that they've tried to introduce some of the raid bosses through this. Now, given the 2 raid bosses in question, or at least for the Alliance War campaign, they're not mega interesting in terms of their story. I mean, some of it's kind of cool, but imagine if you were to do that for, say, the bosses of of Antorus, like that bounty hunter demon character. That could be a pretty cool mission in a war campaign. So if that's going to be an initiative going forward and we explore the raid bosses through the kind of war campaign equivalent, I think that really is a strong area for tying the narrative into the raid. I think that would be really good. So overall, it is an improvement, but it is frustratingly inconsistent with its voice acting just being there or not there, seemingly in a coin toss. There's the assumption the players have read about the other faction's actions through Wowhead, and I just struggle to take Blizzard's attempt at the faction narrative seriously. I think they generally seem to do better with smaller cases, like say Runas from Azuna, where it was a small, contained, simple little narrative that was well executed, or to go for a more old school example, Crusader Bridenbard, which was very simple, it wasn't complex, but it was meaningful because the solids were done the basics were done quite well. Okay, next let's hop over to the islands. So overall, I think the island changes have been very positive, and the system, yeah, it's just in a far better place than it had been previously. So you got the more consistent rewards now drop in line with difficulty. That's way better. You've got the island layouts, which I think now result in far less frustrating gameplay. The various objectives and the points of interest, they all stand out a lot more when they are the focus, rather than just being mired in mountains of trash. Having seafarers' doubloons be more useful and have more interesting rewards is a good thing. The new treasure map quest, which you get at the end of your weekly, that's pretty good. It feels like you earn this cool little reward, and yeah, maybe the mission table aspect and the randomness isn't ideal, but it overall is a good thing. On the whole, the changes are really good, it sounds good, it makes sense. That's great for people who are continuing to play Battle for Azeroth, because for them, a bit of content that they were regularly doing has just got more rewarding and more fun. The problem for Blizzard is that they still do feel quite similar. It still is the same category of content, and it's not going to cut through the apathy that's taken hold in many. More broadly, I also think that Blizzard should add artifact power as a reward for far more content, instead of just being focused on these and world quests. They don't want people farming M+ all day, but maybe just put some AP in the weekly chest. The same goes for the PvP in its chest, and then for the raid bosses. I think removing some of that stuff from Old Deer was a big mistake. This could be alleviated in patch 8.2, absolutely, and I mean, if it was to make broad changes to the AP acquisition, I think that could be very good for players overall, just making that more broad, so that people don't feel like they're funneled through specific types of content that are specifically designed for AP, which I don't think has worked out as well as they hoped it would. So next, let's talk about progression in this patch. 8.1's Titan Residuum is a massive change and a very good thing. Now, yeah, there are quirks in the higher end when people can funnel the Titan Residuum, but for the majority of players, I think it's significantly better than the system that it replaces, and it largely does solve the Azerite acquisition problem, and while it might not be the most thrilling system on Earth, it works, it's a very good change, and that is important. Players can now plan around Azerite, and that's very important given just how much of a part of this expansion Azerite plays. Imagine if Legion opened up its legendary purchase currency in patch 7.2 or 7.1. The one that was added in the BfA pre-patch. That would have rounded out so many of the negatives of that expansion. So overall, Titan Residuum is a great move for the game. Now, as for the rest of progression, as I said, I think the AP should come from dungeons and raids and PvP in higher quantities than it does today. Overall gearing in Battle for Azeroth, right now it's still overly dominated by Warfronts, and it just does seem that for most players, the route to gearing is mainly one of waiting for Warfront weeklies, waiting for good emissaries to spawn, and stuff like that. There's a lot of waiting around for things in Azeroth to happen. Personally, I think that maybe having more engaging professions, maybe with more epic solo challenging quests to get some gear that you have to work on for a bit of time, I think that might be a more satisfying way to do that progression rather than just getting almost a free bit of gear for the various different weeklies. That's for solo players. If you're going through it all with a guild, then yep, no problem. It's just the traditional method. Just as you don't have master loot, that's something that it doesn't seem like they're going to be moving away from in any patch, and I just fundamentally do disagree with that. Blizzard recently said that the personal loot has allowed them to do more special rare drops from bosses. What I would say is that they could still have those special rare drops be on a personal loot roll, and then just have master loot for the regular loot table. They could just do that. Now, for the most part, I think progression it gets a meh for me. Now, the visual stuff is nice in this patch, especially like the new Darkshore armor. I think that's really cool. I'm not sure that people are really going to enjoy doing lots of Warfronts to get it, but the armor itself is a cool and satisfying reward. Okay, so let's just kick it off to the overall section. I think as a large feature patch that's meant to hold the fort for months, I think this one's really quite weak. The new Warfront feels like more of the same, as do the assaults, even though they definitely are a bit better than their previous incarnations. That said, The raid seems really great, and Azeroth being more reliable is brilliant. I think that will make quite a few raiders a bit more happy with the state of the endgame. However, farming Azeroth to re-unlock stuff, yeah, that sucks. It's going to be fixed in 8.2, it seems, but right now it is just a thing we'll have to deal with. And I suppose this patch, it technically does have a lot of content. I mean, not really. It technically got some content anyway, but it's spread out to now, dazar'alor, Crucible of Storms, and that's just drip feeding 20 to 60 minute bursts of the narrative stuff to players over a period of many weeks. And I think that will mean that it'll be spread too thin to have a well-paced narrative that'll keep people engaged. So for me, 8.1 feels more like 8.0.5. It's smaller content additions. I think they also happen to fall into a template that feels overly familiar. But that said, the system changes are quite welcome. So when we look forward into the future, I think this plays a vital role in stabilizing the systems of BfA. It works on many of the problems with the base game, however, it was not rolled out smoothly. The dungeon keystone problem could have been better communicated. It could have actually been turned into a plus if the dungeon bounce changes were also communicated in a more sort of holistic way, as if that was all part of one big change. But still, the Azeroth currency, the Season 2 Azeroth changes, and the reward enhancements, they do round out the endgame progression by quite a bit. Past that, though, I think the content of this patch just doesn't really feel that new and fresh. I'm not sure if Blizzard are drinking their own Kool-Aid and they maybe think it's better than it is, but it may be more internal self-criticism in the team's processes is needed. Today we spent a lot of time talking about systems and progression, but at the end of the day, it's the things that your character actually does that are vitally important. Now, if we're to assume that the next major world content comes out in a patch in May, it's going to feel like a classic content drought until then, because 8.1 already doesn't really feel that new and fresh. And this does seem like a bit of a downer as a video, though overall I probably would say that it's mixed, because existing BfA players will have seen improvements here. Maybe part of the Keystone change, but broadly there are good systems changes. But those who have unsubscribed, unless they're really into raiding, because dazar'alor seems like it's going to be a pretty awesome raid, they're not going to have much of a reason to come back. So overall, from my view, I'd say this patch doesn't really do enough to earn a subscription back. If you've already been enjoying your time in BfA, I think this patch provides lots of good reasons to continue, if you're still enjoying it, of course. But if you have made that decision to unsub, I think it probably makes the most sense to save yourself, to not burn out, and to jump into 8.2, if, as that PTR progresses from people like myself and Preach and T&E, etc., and Asmongold, if you're sort of seeing the PTR coverage, you think, you know what, maybe this patch actually does look good, then maybe that's the time to start thinking about a purchase decision. But until then, I'd probably chill out and hold off, and there's plenty of other games out there to have fun with. So that is my opinions on kind of the state of BfA and what patch 8.1 does for it. I'd love to hear what this patch has been like to you. I'd love to hear what your guild has thought about it. Let me know down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely holiday, and I'll see you next time.